He's managed to put together the most wonderful collection of British Malaya, and it's almost certainly, well, in fact without doubt, the finest collection of its type extant today. Noonans is very proud to present the Frank Goon collection of the banknotes of British Malaya. I first met Frank in the early 1990s. Every country, every area of collectibles have their special clients, and I'm proud to say that when I met Frank, I realized that he was a serious man who had a great interest and passion for the banknotes of British Malaya. And in the previous several decades, basically, I've known Frank. He's managed to put together the most wonderful collection of British Malaya, and it's almost certainly, well, in fact without doubt, the finest collection of its type extant today. I'd like to start with the collection is divided into various parcels: Strait Settlements, British Malaya, Brunei, Sarawak, but the collection starts, and most importantly, with the private banks of British Malaya. All private notes from British Malaya are extremely rare. And if you do find them, they're in appalling condition generally. Frank has managed to accumulate some 40 beautiful examples of the private banks. To find one is difficult. To find as many as Frank has accumulated is remarkable. He's got notes from the Chartered Bank, the Chartered Mercantile Bank, the Northwestern Bank of India, and also one, and I think it's the only one that exists, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank note dated 1888, and I know of no other. I think there is possibly one in an archive, but Frank has the only one extant in private hands. So the collection starts off, as I say, it's a remarkable accumulation of banknotes, and all the notes can be seen in Frank's award-winning book, The Banknotes of British Malaya. And in fact, the sales, which will be held in 2023 and onwards by Noonans, will showcase some of these wonderful notes. The collection then moves on to the banknotes of the Strait Settlements, and the Strait Settlements notes are again hard to find. The climate in Singapore, Sarawak, Borneo, all countries out there is not conducive to paper. Frank was very fortunate in sourcing a lot of his banknotes from European sources where the paper quality is very good, and I would stress that quality is paramount in Frank's collection, and that's what makes the collection, apart from the rarity of the items contained therein, makes it stand out above all other collections. The Strait Settlements notes are quite simply wonderful. He has a $1,000, 19th century $1,000 note. They don't exist basically, Frank has one. He's got a George V $10,000. I mean, $10,000 probably would have bought you half of Singapore when it was issued. I mean, it's a remarkable banknote. He also has the later George V issues, which, although not rare, you try finding them in nice condition. There are 5 dates of issue. Anytime you see a Strait Settlements note, it's 1935. Frank has 1931, 32, 33, 34. It's a complete collection, and the quality is, I know I stressed this more than once, is absolutely fantastic. We then move on to the banknotes of British Malaya, probably the cornerstone of Frank's collection. The collection starts with 3 banknotes, a $1, a $5 and a $10. George VI dated 1939. There are no George VI notes of 1939, and yet Frank has a set of 3 notes. These are probably, I always say probably because someone always turns up another set the moment you say they're unique, but I genuinely believe they probably are unique in private hands and maybe in archives or museums as well. They are wonderful notes. He then has all the issues of George VI, including essays, hand-painted composite notes that were designed by the printers but not actually printed. In other words, notes that do not exist. He has die proofs, which again, early stage of producing a banknote, extremely rare. Colour trials of notes, and it's when you have a note that is basically quite common, like a $100 George VI, I say common, it's a relative term, and you've got one in a different colour than the issued colour of red, you look at it and you think, wow, what's that? Amazing things. And then of course the issued notes, he's got great runs of the fractional notes up to the $10,000 notes. I think a special note to mention, he's got a Queen Elizabeth 1953 issued $1,000 in wonderful condition. If you had $1,000 in British Malaya in 1953, you didn't put it in a drawer and forget about it. It represented an enormous sum of money. So to actually find one still existing and not cashed in at the bank or anything is remarkable. Frank's example is a wonderful note. And that's just one of many, many British Malaya and Malaya and Borneo issues that Frank has in the collection. And I think just one thing to add as well to the banknotes of British Malaya. I've mentioned there are colour trials, die proofs, etc. He has some photographs, archival photographs. The printers used to produce a banknote for approval by the government. Notes would be designed and sent out to British Malaya for approval. Sometimes the notes were not adopted. The printers would take a photograph of the essay. The essay would be sent out. If it wasn't adopted, it was probably disposed of somewhere. The photographs are the only record of some of the notes that were thought of at the time and are, as such, extremely rare items in their own right. And photographs, 20 years ago, you couldn't find any, and there was no established market for them. I think photographs now do tend to sell for remarkable sums of money sometimes. So not only has he got proofs, essays, specimens, but photographs as well. Sarawak. The name conjures up all kinds of romantic images. I mean, what was basically a privately run empire by the Brooke family. He has some lovely examples of some of the Sarawak banknotes, including Charles Johnson Brooke, and you can't get notes from Charles Johnson Brooke. Charles Viner Brooke, several notes, including the most wonderful composite essay, again for a note that never was produced. Absolutely beautiful. Lots of issued notes, and Sarawak, as I say, you can't get much from Sarawak. Frank has managed to do that, and they are, although not the same breadth and scale of, say, British Malaya or Strait Settlements, it's a much smaller area of collecting, and Frank has put together the most wonderful selection. The banknotes of British Borneo, again, a much smaller collecting field, and again, the printing is not maybe up to the standards of British Malaya or the Straits, for example, but they are a very, very historical series. The quality of the paper tends to be very poor because notes that circulate in Borneo are generally used and the climate is not friendly to paper. Frank has got the most lovely condition Borneo notes, most of which feature Mount Kinabalu in the centre, and although, as I said, a smaller collecting field, Frank's Borneo is a wonderful group of banknotes, and I'm sure will be eagerly accepted by the market because you just can't find these things anywhere. The banknotes of Singapore, again, obviously a subject dear to Frank's heart, are a fascinating series. Although they're more modern banknotes, they are absolutely beautiful in design. You've got the orchid design, the boat design, the bird design. My personal favourites, probably in Frank's collection, there was a series of hand-painted banknote essays prepared by the printers for the bird series with various different birds on. So if you see the $1,000 note and it has a certain bird on it, then you see another $2,000 notes with a different bird on them, you think, how did that happen? Again, notes never adopted, but it's a beautiful, beautiful series. Historically, I think probably one of the most interesting notes in the whole of Frank's collection. He has a set of notes for Singapore, denominations in ringgit. Now, obviously, when the state of Singapore came into being, they were wondering what sort of paper money to produce. Politically very sensitive at the time. and a set of notes was produced, all in the denomination of ringgit. Well, the ringgit is a Malaysian currency and the ringgit is still used now, but for Singapore to have a note in ringgit was quite an event. As it happens, of course, the notes never actually saw the light of day, but as pieces of history from early Singapore currency, or currency indeed of the whole area, they are absolutely fascinating and truly unique and really quite eye-opening in their sort of rarity. The banknotes of Malaysia, again a subject like Singapore, dear to Frank's heart. Frank has a very, very good collection of Malaysia. There are several series of notes, specimens, essays, colour trials. My personal favourite, probably, he has two very, very early Bank Negara essays with the portrait of the Tunku Abdul Rahman on, which I think are absolutely gorgeous. And again, a complete collection, very, very difficult to get nowadays. The last group is Brunei. Brunei, much smaller collection. There's not much you can collect from Brunei. Again, one of my favorites, there is a 10,000 note in there. These massive titans of banknotes, we call them. In Singapore, you get $10,000 notes, but the $10,000 titans, they were called, and the Brunei 10,000, I think, is probably one of the highest denomination notes in the world, if not the highest denomination note in the world. There is also, of the Sultan on the notes, there is a lovely essay of him bareheaded. Now, this may to the uninitiated seem so what. All the banknotes of Brunei tend to have the Sultan wearing a military cap or a hat of some kind. This is a bareheaded essay. It was never adopted, but when you look at it, and you know that the Brunei series always has a figure with a hat on or a military cap, to see one without is most unusual. I think, to summarise, obviously Noonans are delighted that Frank has decided to consign his collection to us. I've known Frank many years. He has always been a pleasure to deal with, and I think the expression, which is probably somewhat overused, but Frank is what you could genuinely call a gentleman collector. But his collection is without peer in the area, and the quality of the banknotes speak for themselves. And I think anybody looking at Frank's excellent book, the award-winning Banknotes of British Malaya, you turn the pages and every page you find a note that you actually think, wow, that is a fantastic note. And that's how you judge how good a collection is, when you turn the pages and you see something you've never seen before. And if you've seen a lot of banknotes, believe you me, it doesn't happen that often. Frank's collection is wonderful. That's all I can really say about it. Thank you, Frank, and I look forward very much to the auctions, and hopefully we will see all our friends and collectors in the hobby in 2023. Thank you.